Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a time when silence held more weight than shouting, and when your handwriting might matter more than your sword swing. You're a samurai now. Yes, you. And you're sitting cross-legged inside a small wooden room lit by a single paper lantern. The air smells faintly of pine wood and black ink. It's early morning, and your duel isn't for several hours. Yet you're already up, not sharpening your blade, but dipping your brush into ink. You pause. The paper in front of you is rice, thin, delicate. It rustles if you so much as breathe too hard. Still, your hand hovers steady. You begin to move the brush slowly, letting each stroke form a character that means something timeless. Honor wind. Silence death. This isn't decoration. This is preparation. It may even be your last act of creation on Earth. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you all tune in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You see, in the world of the samurai battles weren't just physical. They were spiritual. Before you unsheathed your blade, you had to master the art of unsheathing your thoughts. It wasn't enough to fight. You had to write. And not just scribble something quick. This was an act of beauty, of concentration, and of deadly intention. Calligraphy wasn't a side hobby. It was part of your training. Imagine modern athletes warming up with ballet. That's kind of what this is. But instead of pliés, you're crafting ideograms. Your calligraphy session this morning isn't a quaint custom. It's a survival tactic. Precision in writing trains, precision in killing. Flow of the wrist, control of the breath, the rhythm of movement. All skills that transfer seamlessly to a katana. Historians still argue whether this obsession with calligraphy was really practical training or more of a cultural flex. Maybe it was both. After all, showing up to a duel with a scroll of elegant kanji tucked into your sleeve does say I'm so calm about killing you. I wrote a poem about it. Outside the garden is waking up. Crickets are fading. A few finches hop along the stone wall. You hear a bamboo water fountain tip and thump, a moment of peace cut by sound. It's meant to scare away deer, but it startles you instead. You laugh quietly at yourself, scared of a stick, yet ready to face steel. Your ink stroke falters slightly, and you breathe deep. The ink bleeds more than you'd like. It's a reminder. Perfection is impossible, but discipline is not. This tradition of pre-battle writing stretches back centuries. The Heian period, around 794 to 1185 CE, was when the Japanese court culture went wild for poetry and brushwork. Even warriors wanted in. Later, during the more brutal Sengoku period, warlords still made time to write. They built castles and burned villages, but also kept calligraphy tutors on staff. One particularly famous figure, the daimyo Takeda Shingen, was both a fierce war strategist and a connoisseur of graceful penmanship. The guy could siege a fortress and still fuss over whether his ki character had the proper brush pressure. Priorities. You wipe the brush on a cloth. Your fingers are blackened, your sleeve spotted with ink. You feel more centered now, less adrenaline, more intention. The duel is still ahead, but you're not rushing to it. You're walking to it. With every brush stroke, your body understands patience. The paper in front of you is more than paper. It's proof that you existed, that you prepared, that you thought deeply before spilling blood. If you die today, And let's face it, there's a solid chance you'll leave behind something beautiful, a final mark, maybe even a death poem. There's something romantic about that, isn't there? The idea that your last act might be to express yourself, not destroy someone else. Calligraphy slows you down. And maybe, just maybe in slowing down, you'll find clarity. Or at least some poetic symmetry in a life that could end in a heartbeat. A quirky side note. Some samurai would bury their best calligraphy pieces under their home as spiritual insurance, sort of like saying, "If my soul gets lost, please forward it to this address." And yes, while we're being honest, not every samurai was a brush-wielding poet-warrior. Some were just brutes in armor with bad handwriting. But among the elite calligraphy was as much a status symbol as it was soul work. A man who could kill you and quote Chinese poetry. Now that's someone worth inviting to the palace tea party. You gently place your finished sheet on a bamboo tray. The ink must dry naturally. No rushing, no blotting. Like all things in this life, it settles at its own pace. You bow to the paper, not theatrically, just a quiet nod of respect, and begin to roll up your brush mat. The katana waits behind you upright on its stand. Later you'll polish it with the same care you used to mix the ink. But for now, it can wait. First there is tea to drink, silence to hold, breath to count. You've already fought the most important battle today, the one between fear and focus. And you won. With ink. You sit a little straighter now. The scent of ink still fresh in the air, your fingers cooled by the chill of the morning. Outside, the mountain mist has begun to lift, revealing the sloped tile roofs of the compound, each one slick with dew. Stillness clings to everything, trees, stones, even time itself. It is not yet the hour of combat. First comes the hour of clarity. You unfurl a new sheet of paper. Your brush hovers once again this time, not to write a poem, but to practice. Repetition is everything, and each stroke is like a breath, long, intentional, weightless, if done right. You move the brush downward, a slow, vertical line, then lift with the gentleness of a falling leaf, zen in the stroke. That's what your calligraphy teacher used to say. Back then you thought he was just being dramatic. He was one of those wiry old men who could stab you with a chopstick, but chose to spend his afternoons sipping tea with a brush. He always smelled faintly of sandalwood and pickled plums. He spoke little, but when he did, it was either to correct your posture or remind you that a rushed mind leaves jagged ink. And now, here you are the day of a duel, practicing kanji for emptiness and stillness. Not practicing a parry, not rehearsing a strike. You're writing. Calligraphy or Shodo is not just art, it's movement. Every stroke has a direction, a weight, a rhythm. The best samurai knew that their handwriting was a reflection of their state of mind. And unlike a blade which could chip or rust a brush, could betray them far more subtly. In battle, hesitation can mean death. But here in front of the paper, hesitation means something different, it shows. In your stroke, in the thickness of the ink, in the uneven curve. The paper becomes a confession booth. You can't lie with your brush. It tells the truth before your mouth ever gets a chance. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on calligraphy was truly a tool for combat readiness, or merely an elite affectation, a performance of refinement in an age of violence. Yet for you, the link is obvious. The control required to shape the character for soul is the same control needed to slice through an arrow midair. And yes, that's a thing. Samurai actually trained to do that, usually against straw targets. though one guy supposedly sliced a falling needle. Fringe claim. But hey, it's in the scrolls. Your hand glides now effortlessly, forming the character for stillness. It's harder than it looks. Stillness isn't just the absence of movement, it's the presence of calm. The deliberate not moving, like waiting in a duel for your opponent to blink, or watching for the moment when a petal drops and catching it mid-air just because you can. The monks at the nearby temple once told you that calligraphy is moving meditation, and it's true. As you write, your breath slows. The tension in your back fades. The birdsong outside becomes music instead of noise. Even your doubts fade into the grain of the paper. The Zen influence on samurai culture runs deep. You can't ignore it. These weren't just men with swords. These were men trained to observe the silence between sounds, to hear rain before it falls, to sense the shift in wind not as weather, but as omen. And calligraphy gave structure to all that. It was mindfulness with consequence, because in both duels and ink, there's no Cottrell Zede. You remember one rainy afternoon years ago when you first realized the brush might actually save your life. You were young, hot-blooded, proud. Your strokes were all pressure, no breath. Each character looked like it had been attacked rather than written. Your teacher took one look, sighed, and handed you a single sheet of paper. "Write mu," he said. Mu means nothingness, or everything, or something in between. It's one of those words that folds in on itself like a koan. You spent 4 hours on it. Just one character. When you finally got it right, not perfect but true, you realized you'd stopped clenching your jaw. Your heart had stopped racing. Your mind had let go. That was the first time you felt ready for a fight. Back in the present, you glance at your finished strokes. They're smoother now. More honest, less panicked. The duel is still hours away, but inside you've already faced the fear. You've met it with ink, you've bowed to it, and said, "I see you." And fear, when acknowledged properly, tends to loosen its grip, a fringe detail. Some samurai reportedly used to sign their death poems or farewell notes with a fingerprint of ink, not blood. That way, even in their final hours, they were artists, not butchers. Their enemies could read their last thoughts, quiet, graceful, uncensored. It's hard to imagine your average medieval knight pausing mid-battle to write a haiku. That's the strange beauty of your world. Death walks beside you constantly, but never rushes. You don't get to choose whether it arrives. But you do get to choose your posture when it does, and whether your final act will be chaos or composition. So you write again. This time, the character for wind. Your brush flicks slightly at the end, leaving a whisper of ink. The motion is quick, but practiced. Like a blade being drawn, then sheathed without a sound. You roll up your final sheet, letting the ink dry as the mountain air slips cool across your neck. You don't bother checking your work again. You know the strokes were steady. Your breathing measured, your intent sharp. The ritual is complete for now, but there's one more piece left to write. Not practice, not training, this one's different. This one might be your last. You reach into the lacquered chest beside you and remove a slightly thicker parchment. It's cream-colored handmade, with pressed flower fibers barely visible in the grain. This one's special, saved for the occasion. Few ever speak of, yet all prepare for. The Jisei, the death poem. You place it down with both hands and bow, just slightly before picking up your brush again. The room, once quiet, now feels reverent. This is the space between breaths, between life and whatever comes after, and you're going to write your way across that threshold. Your death poem doesn't need to be long. Most aren't. A single haiku will do. Just a few syllables to say I was here. I saw. I understood. It sounds intense, maybe even melodramatic, but it's tradition. Writing a death poem, jisei no ku, was a deeply embedded custom among samurai monks and scholars. You're not trying to be famous. You're just trying to leave behind something that feels honest, something that isn't just blood or silence. The brush dips again. You write slowly, choosing characters that resonate. Maybe something about wind in pine trees. Maybe something about falling leaves and the impermanence of strength. Your hand hesitates not out of fear, but care, because once you finish this, it'll exist forever. Historians still debate how many samurai truly composed these poems on the eve of death versus afterward by surviving relatives. But scrolls from the 14th and 15th centuries are littered with them, some elegant, some cryptic, some darkly humorous. One warrior supposedly wrote, "Had I not known that I was dead already, I would have mourned my loss of life." You're not trying to be clever. You're trying to be real. The poem becomes your mirror. What you see there is up to you. And here's something curious: your opponent is probably doing the same thing right now. Across town in a different dojo, he's likely seated just like you, brush in hand writing his version of this quiet farewell. You'll meet later, not as strangers, but as men who've shared the same intimate ritual, knowing you may both die, yet still bothering to write about how the flowers looked this morning. That's the samurai way. Death isn't just expected, it's curated. Calligraphy and poetry weren't some artsy distraction from violence. They were a way to metabolize it, to name the chaos, to shape fear into something tangible. If war is fire, then the brush is the vessel that holds it without burning. You finish your poem and lay the sheet down beside your earlier works. The ink gleams wet in the light. It may still be here when the sun sets. You may not. You think back to the great General Kusunoki Masashige. Before his final battle in the 14th century, he supposedly composed a poem, accepting death and pledging loyalty to the emperor. He wrapped it around his sword. Then he charged into hopeless combat legend, says he asked to be beheaded so his soul could go to the afterlife, in one clean slice. Whether that part's true, historians of course still argue. But the poem that survived. You smile at that, how strange it is that paper often lasts longer than flesh. Stone crumbles, steel rusts. But poetry, it whispers forever. There's a touch of theater to it, all sure. Even the quietest samurai loved a little flair. But that doesn't make the ritual empty. It just makes it human. When you write your death poem, you aren't just preparing to die. You're declaring how you wish to be remembered. A fringe detail not everyone knows. Some samurai used to scent their paper with incense, just a little enough that the poem, when found later, carried a final breath of personality. Imagine that your last words arriving perfumed with sandalwood or plum blossom. You pick up the parchment, hold it to the light, and exhale. That's it. That's the one. No edits. No second draft. Your last words are never revised. Outside, someone rings a distant bell. 3 slow chimes. It's the signal that your hour has nearly come. Time to gather your gear tie, your armor bow to your ancestors. But before you go, you fold the poem, place it gently into a small wooden case, and tuck it inside your sleeve. If you fall in battle, someone will find it. Maybe your comrade, maybe your enemy. Either way, They'll read the lines and know that you walked into death not blindly, but wide awake, and in a world where most men vanish with nothing but their name. That's a kind of immortality. You rise from your cushion slowly, knees cracking, shoulders stiff, from the long stillness. But your hands feel warm, almost electric. That's what ink does. It moves something in you, something deeper than muscle. You gather your scrolls, slip them into a wooden tube, and slide it into the sleeve of your kimono. The brush goes back into its cloth wrap, tied tight, like a sacred tool. Everything in its place. Now comes the waiting. But as you stretch your legs and step outside, the memory of others follows you. The long line of warriors whose handwriting outlived their swordplay. Their scrolls still hang in temples. Their brushstrokes still studied in quiet classrooms. Their names now less known for how many lives they took, and more for how beautifully they wrote the character for autumn. You walk along the garden path, wet gravel crunching beneath your sandals. It's still early, but the light is shifting, thin sun filtering through plum trees, casting soft shadows across the stone. There's a fountain nearby, a natural spring, channeled into a low stone basin, and you pause to rinse your hands. Cold water flows endlessly, shaped by channels carved generations ago. Gravity-fed, perfectly angled. Like everything the old ones built, quiet, precise, invisible, unless you're looking for it. A strange truth settles over you in this world. Your sword will rust before your ink fades. In the records of old monasteries and battle houses, there are countless scrolls signed by warriors. Some are stiff, shaky, uneven, written under pressure, perhaps moments before death. Others flow like wind on silk, clear and bold. And sometimes, just sometimes, the brush reveals what the blade could not, that a man was terrified or brave or deeply lonely. Take the case of Hosokawa Yusai, a renowned warrior poet of the Sengoku era. He was a skilled swordsman, yes, but it was his calligraphy that gained him respect, even from enemies. During a siege when his fortress was surrounded and defeat seemed inevitable, rival generals begged him not to die, not because they feared his blade, but because they didn't want to lose his knowledge of poetry and prose. The battle was paused. Seriously, historians still argue whether that truce really happened or was embellished later by literary fans, but the story lingers. And if it was fiction, well, that only proves how powerful the pen could be. Your mind wanders to another scroll you saw years ago in a dusty archive outside Kyoto. It wasn't flashy, just 3 short lines in flowing kanji, but it had a weight to it, as if the writer had poured everything they were into those strokes. A warrior's name was signed below, along with the date just 1 day before his death. The ink had faded to brown, but the words still whispered. It was as if the man had never quite left. You keep walking. Past the courtyard, down the covered walkway, where old sandals rest in pairs. You nod to the attendant who returns the gesture silently, as if acknowledging not just your presence, but your preparedness. There's a scroll on the wall here, one of the bloody scrolls, though. You wouldn't know it at first glance. It's beautifully done the character for stillness, surrounded by painted mist and reeds. But legend says the samurai who wrote it did so just after being wounded in battle. He staggered back to his camp, wrote the scroll with trembling hands and blood-inked fingers, then died sitting upright against the wall. Melodramatic, maybe, but real enough that the scroll has never been taken down. Fringe detail some scrolls were passed down like heirlooms. Families would keep a warrior's final calligraphy beside their ancestral sword, as if to say this was his voice, and this was his silence. You touch the scroll's edge with reverence before continuing. Up ahead is the dueling ring, a wide clearing of smooth-packed earth, bordered by stones. It looks almost like a Zen garden, but with the tension of an unstruck match. In an hour, this space will hold violence. But now, it's just empty air and a few circling dragonflies. You take a seat nearby under the edge of a cypress tree. No need to rush. Your opponent will arrive when it's time. He's probably writing, too, his own calligraphy, his own death poem. Or maybe he's sharpening his blade, thinking only of speed and muscle. Not every samurai balanced the two. Some left behind only torn armor and forgotten names. But you've already ensured your voice will outlive your body. Whether you win or fall, someone will find your scrolls. They'll see your hand in every stroke, your mind in every pause. And that matters. Maybe even more than the duel itself. Because the blade is momentary. The brush is forever. You close your eyes beneath the swaying cypress and let the morning quiet settle over you like a shawl. Everything is arranged within and without. The armor you'll wear waits folded inside. Your sword lies in its case edge honed to a whisper. And the brush, cleaned, wrapped, set aside its work done for now. Yet your mind remains active, uncoiling around the rituals that brought you here. There's something comforting about ritual, isn't there? The repetition, the muscle memory. Whether you're writing poetry, drinking tea, or tying the cords of your armor, it all follows a rhythm, a sacred choreography of control. And for the samurai, control was survival. It wasn't just calligraphy that shaped your mind before a duel. It was everything, every small act performed with deliberate stillness. You think of the tea ceremony, or chanoyu, where every movement is prescribed. Bowing to the bowl, turning it twice, sipping without slurping. It's not about the tea. It's about the moment, just like the brush or the blade. You've attended those ceremonies, haven't you? Seated on your knees for what feels like hours, resisting the urge to stretch, to sigh, to be anywhere else. But in that stillness, you learned something essential: how to wait. How to feel your own heartbeat without panicking. How to act without thinking. Historians still argue whether the tea ceremony evolved strictly from Zen monks or was later co-opted by samurai as a form of political signaling. Either way, it's hard to ignore how often cups of tea preceded declarations of war or quiet assassinations. Even now, before this duel, you crave a cup. Not for refreshment, but for alignment. The warmth in your hands, the heat blooming in your chest. It's a tuning fork for the spirit. Rituals like these, tea calligraphy, even the slow act of dressing for battle, are not frills. They're focus. They're armor of the mind. And when it comes time to strap on your actual armor, you do it methodically, left sleeve first, then right. Ties around the chest, then the plates across the thighs. The knot at your hip must face backward, always backward. You don't need it snagged if you're retreating, though. Let's hope it won't come to that. Each movement is the echo of 100 days before this one. This is not improvisation. This is ritualized readiness. Your sword, when you pick it up, feels both foreign and familiar. You've held it thousands of times, yet each time has its own weight. You slide it into your sash with a practiced motion, then pause. A quick glance at your hands, clean, calm. No ink stains anymore. Just faint calluses from brushwork and blade alike. That's the quiet truth no one tells you. Mastery doesn't come from choosing one thing over another. It comes from folding everything into a whole. You're not a warrior who also writes. You are a warrior because you write. And writing teaches you patience. The ink doesn't rush. The strokes cannot be forced. You wait. You breathe. You flow. It's not so different from sparring in the dojo. You remember the way your master used to watch you, not correcting, just observing. And when you asked why he never said anything during your matches, he replied, "Because your brush already told me." That answer stayed with you. He wasn't looking at your blade technique. He was reading your character from the scrolls you practiced each morning. If your kanji was sloppy, your footwork would be too. If your brush pressure wavered, so would your timing in a fight. Fringe fact in some samurai school's promotion wasn't just based on sparring results or battlefield victories. Students had to submit calligraphy samples as part of their evaluation. A good stroke could tip the scale. An uncentered character might raise doubts about your mental clarity. Can you imagine that now? A job interview where your handwriting determines your sword license. Sorry, your dragon kanji is a little off balance. Come back next year. But it made sense. The brush exposes your inner state. The rituals shape it. You sip the tea brought by your attendant, strong, bitter, earthy. No sugar, no milk, no distractions. It sharpens the senses. You can feel the clay bowl warming your fingertips. You breathe in steam and exhale nerves. Your death poem tucked safely away your armor. Secure your brushwork, complete you are ready. Not because you're fearless. You're not. No one is. But because you've done the work. And in the end, that's all the rituals are for. Not to make you perfect, but to remind you that you've prepared. You hear the bell again once, then twice. The duel is near. You stand letting the cypress shadow fall away from your shoulders. You step onto the path, sandals scraping softly over gravel. With every step, the noise of the world dims behind you. You walk toward the ring, not like a man going to war, but like someone walking into a story that's already half written, and your part inked in sweat breath and silence is just about to begin. The path narrows now, hemmed in by tall bamboo and moss-covered stones. The wind moves softly through the stalks, making a dry, shushing sound like nature reminding you to stay quiet. You adjust your armor one last time, not because it's uncomfortable, but because the gesture grounds you. Each tie and clasp is familiar, like punctuation marks in a sentence you've written 1,000 times. And just like your brush, once danced across parchment this morning now, your steps trace a different kind of calligraphy across the earth. The dueling ring appears up ahead, framed by trees. Empty still. Your opponent has not yet arrived. Good. You need a moment alone with your reflection. You kneel at the edge of the ring, facing inward, not outward. Not yet. This is your space now. You draw your sword not in challenge, but for inspection. The blade flashes in the soft morning light, revealing faint hammer marks, small scars of its forging. You run a cloth along the edge, a ritual as instinctive as breathing. The sword is honest, like the brush, but even more revealing, because once drawn, it cannot lie. Your thoughts drift to your master, again the one who trained you in both blade and ink. He used to say that a man's character is visible in his calligraphy and undeniable in his swordsmanship. But the brush, he'd add with a smirk, is the crueler judge, because it leaves a trail. He wasn't wrong. You remember the time he made you write the same character for heart 30 times in a row. Not because it was hard, but because yours looked too angry, too sharp. Control your spirit, he'd said. Your heart should not stab. It stung then, that critique. But now you see the wisdom. The ink showed what you didn't want to admit, that your emotions were tangled, uncentered. That kind of spirit would falter in a duel. Today, though, your strokes were steady, measured, present, and that brings you peace. You glance at the edge of the clearing, half expecting your opponent to appear from the trees like a fox, but still, no one. So you take the time to breathe, truly breathe, in through the nose, deep into the stomach, out through the mouth, slow and quiet. You count each cycle like a monk, like a scribe, like a man who knows the stakes. The wind picks up again, and a single leaf drops into the ring. You watch it spin as it lands a tiny spiral of red against the pale soil. You smile. In another life, that might have been the subject of your morning poem. Historians still debate whether samurai truly practiced mindfulness in a way we'd recognize today, or whether it was just a byproduct of their training. But here in this moment, it feels real. No distractions, no thoughts of lunch or errands or distant ambitions. Just now. And in now, you are enough. A side note. Some surviving calligraphy scrolls include not just poetry or moral aphorisms, but doodles, little sketches of turtles, of clouds, of household cats. Some samurai, it turns out, liked to scribble when no one was looking. Even the most hardened warrior had a soft spot, or at least a sense of humor. You think of that now as you lower your blade and draw your sleeve across your forehead. A bead of sweat, whether from nerves or the growing sun, you're not sure. But you don't resist it. You just let it fall. Acceptance is part of the practice. Your gaze turns inward again, and you think of the scrolls that will one day hang in some distant room. Maybe a temple, maybe your family's home, maybe nowhere at all. But if they survive, they'll show who you were, not just what you did. Because the ink doesn't forget. A line of your master's writing flashes in your mind. The sword may sever, but the brush reveals. You didn't understand it as a boy. Now, on the brink of a duel, it lands with perfect weight. You feel your breath steady, your spine align, your mind go quiet. You are ready. Not just for the clash, but for the consequence, because the sword is only ever half the story. The other half is already written folded neatly in your sleeve, sealed in strokes of black ink. The true you, preserved not in blood, but in brushwork. Footsteps crunch behind you. Slow, deliberate. Your opponent has arrived. But for now, you remain still. Because stillness, as your brush once taught you, is the beginning of all movement. You don't turn around right away. Let him arrive first. Let him settle into the space. The dueling ring belongs to both of you now, but the silence, at least for this moment, still belongs to you. You listen. His steps are slow, respectful. No armor clinking, no rushed breath. You catch a soft thwop of sandals brushing dry earth, the faint rustle of fabric. He's calm. Good. A nervous opponent is dangerous in all the wrong ways, unpredictable, desperate, likely to strike before thought can catch up. But a calm opponent, that's someone who understands the rules, maybe even the poetry. You rise not stiffly, but with intention, turning to meet his eyes across the ring. He bows, and you return it. Mutual recognition, not just of skill, but of presence. Two mirrors facing each other, each reflecting discipline, lineage, and intent. His sword remains sheathed. So does yours. There's no rush. Instead, something curious happens. He reaches into his sleeve and draws a narrow strip of fabric, a length of calligraphy ribbon. inked in bold black kanji. You recognize the phrase instantly. Walk. Lightly die well. It's a proverb. Not uncommon. But the way he presents it tied carefully around his scabbard, fluttering slightly in the breeze, it's more than a quote. It's a declaration. A poem in motion. A promise. Maybe to himself. You nod once. He sees you see it. This is a different kind of duel already. You've trained for years in both sword and scroll. And today, it's clear he has too. This isn't just a fight. This is a conversation conducted in steel and silence, but rooted in ink. Your thoughts drift to your training hall, the dojo, where these rituals were born. Where calligraphy was not just encouraged, but required. Your master had scrolls hanging along every wall, characters for stillness, clarity, patience cut, each written by past students, each telling its own story. Historians often overlook this part of samurai education, focusing instead on combat manuals and military hierarchies. But buried in temple archives and dusty dojo shelves, you'll find writing samples kept like trophies. The best ones, the truly exceptional scrolls, were sometimes framed and displayed in shrines, offerings not of faith, but of form. Your own scroll once earned a quiet place there. You were 15. You'd spent a week perfecting the character for River. You remember your teacher standing over your shoulder arms, folded, saying nothing. When you finally got it right, just the right fluidity, the curve like water slipping around stone, he simply nodded and walked away. A week later, the scroll was mounted above the north window. No announcement, no ceremony, just presence. And ever since then you understood the brush is not extra. It's elemental. Fringe fact. Some schools of swordsmanship believe the brush taught better balance than sparring. Because when writing kanji, your center of gravity matters. Your wrist must float. Your shoulders must anchor. Your core must steady. Bad posture leads to bad strokes. Bad strokes reveal a wandering spirit. The dojo taught you how to anchor your soul. The ring you're in now, it's just an extension of that training space. No walls, but the same energy. The same code. The same invisible ink hovering in the air between you and him. You both move to the center now. Neither speaks. There's nothing to say. What happens next won't be determined by shouting, but by movement. And memory. You sense it, the tension. Like a string being slowly pulled between you. Tightenings, but not yet snapping. This is the moment before the first stroke. The blank page. The calm before the brush makes contact. And as with all blank pages, it demands honesty. You lower your right hand to the hilt of your sword. Not grasping, just resting. Testing the temperature of the moment. He mirrors you. You're both poised like punctuation at the end of an unfinished sentence. This is what your years of dojo practice were preparing you for, not the kill, but the moment before. The microsecond when intention crystallizes into action. And whether that action is to draw or to wait or to walk away, it will be true. Because the training leaves no room for falsehood. That's the brilliance of the dojo. It was never about force. It was about form. Even now, in this charged silence, you can feel your breath slowing. The brush taught you how. Inhale with the upstroke. Exhale with the down. Everything in rhythm. No movement wasted. No energy scattered. Your opponent's eyes narrow not in aggression, but in focus. You see it. He's steady like you. This duel won't be chaotic. It will be clean, precise, like two calligraphers competing with blades. The breeze stirs the calligraphy ribbon on his scabbard again. It flutters then stills, and in that quiet you understand. The real duel already began hours ago with the ink. What happens next is just the echo. The silence lingers like a taut string, humming between your breath and his. You remain still, sensing every shift in air, every creak of a bamboo stalk in the wind. He hasn't drawn yet. Neither have you. And perhaps you won't for a moment like this, is its own kind of power. A suspended brushstroke, the final breath, before ink touches paper, before the blade cleaves space. But deep inside you already know something strange. This might be the most beautiful duel you never fight. Why? Because you see it in him. He's not posturing, not puffed up with pride or trembling with rage. He's composed. His shoulders low, his gaze focused but not flaring. The same way yours are. You're two mirrors again. Perfectly aligned, perfectly calm. This is what they don't teach in the stories, that sometimes the greatest duel isn't won by the fastest draw, but by the stillness that makes drawing unnecessary. You both step back at the same time. Just a pace, a breath of space. The tension thins, not breaks, just softens like ink spreading across damp paper. A mutual pause. Not surrender, not avoidance, just understanding. And perhaps, deep down, you both sense it. This isn't your moment to kill. It's your moment to live. You bow again, lower this time, and he mirrors you. When you rise, your hand leaves the hilt of your blade, and instead, you reach into your sleeve. You pull out your scroll, the one with your calligraphy from this morning. You unroll it just a little enough to reveal the characters, for Furyu elegant, but fleeting. He watches. No expression, but something shifts in his posture, like a softening around the ribs. A release. He responds in kind, reaching beneath his breastplate and withdrawing a tiny pouch. From it, he produces a square of cloth, with a poem inked in bold, striking strokes. The poem is short, just 6 characters, but the final 2, Keide no Yuma Shadow's Dream, are written with heartbreaking grace. That's when you realize this man is more than your opponent. He's your reflection. Your twin forged on a different mountain, under a different master, but shaped by the same rules right beautifully. Fight deliberately. Die poetically. And suddenly, the duel becomes something else entirely. Not performance, not dominance, but respect. You step closer, not into striking distance, but into acknowledgement, a kind of reverence, because in this moment reputation matters more than violence, and your reputation, just like his, is built not just on the blade, but on brushwork. You both earned this reputation, not by how many you've killed, but by how deeply you've lived, and how honestly you've written. This is what many never understood, that among the samurai the brush was a kind of armor. It shielded you from forgetting who you were. It reminded you that discipline wasn't just for killing, it was for carrying yourself through a world of chaos with calm. In some courts, calligraphy alone could win you a duel before it began. There are scrolls still preserved that were sent, instead of messengers, their kanji, so graceful, so balanced, that they turned enemies into allies. One famously poetic general, it said, once convinced an entire rival clan to stand down by sending a handwritten letter that moved the opposing daimyo to tears. Historians still argue whether that story's been embellished, but the original scroll does exist. It's faded now behind glass in a museum, but the strokes still shine with something electric, like someone carved intention into time itself. That's the power of the brush. Its scars are permanent, and you feel it now. Standing across from this man who could have killed you or died trying, but instead offers you ink on cloth. A surrender. No. A truce, maybe. But more than that, an acknowledgement that this moment is worth more preserved than shattered. A fringe tradition, not well known outside old martial circles, involves warriors exchanging calligraphy after a duel not always before. If one man fell, the other would write his name in elegant characters on a scroll, along with the time, the place, and a brief description of how he died. It was a gesture of respect, an obituary in ink. You think of that now, and feel a quiet gratitude that today no such scroll is needed. You take his poem gently, fold it with care, and tuck it beside your own. Not as a trophy, but as proof. Proof that your art and your training have led you to a victory without blood. A duel resolved not by strength, but by stature. Not by steel, but by soul. You both step back again. One final bow, and without a word he turns and walks the path back through the bamboo. You do not watch him go. Instead, you kneel at the center of the ring alone, again breathing steady. The gravel beneath you stills. The air softens. And in your sleeve, the ink of two warriors now rests. You remain kneeling in the center of the dueling ring, your heartbeat finely matching the rhythm of the earth beneath you. Not fast, not slow, just aligned. There's no crowd, no applause, no grand declaration of victory. The only witnesses are the trees, the wind, and that solitary leaf still resting in the dirt. But you know something meaningful just passed between you and him, something more lasting than combat. Stillness stretches thick and nourishing like morning miso. You let it settle. Then without urgency, you rise and dust your knees. Your muscles are loose now, not from exhaustion, but from relief. You sheath your sword with a deliberate motion. The blade sings just a little, as it slides home one final note in a performance you never had to play. And as you walk away from the ring, you feel lighter than before, like the brush stroke that never had to be drawn, or the poem left unwritten because the moment itself was enough. But the moment lingers, and soon you find yourself back inside seated before the scroll you practiced earlier this morning. The ink has dried now, those black ribbons of meaning laid down before any tension touched the day. You reach for another sheet, not because anyone asked, not because you must, but because there's something left to say. And so you write. One duel uncut. Two poems exchanged, not blades. The brush wins again. You sit back smiling quietly. This is why the brush comes before the blade. In another corner of the world, one far less patient, a duel might end in chaos. But here, the rituals hold. They protect you from impulse. They wrap you in a kind of armor that's impossible to see, but impossible to fake. Reputation, after all, is more than what people say. It's what you leave behind. And nothing lingers like ink on paper. You recall stories from your training days of warriors who never had to draw their swords because their calligraphy alone was too intimidating. One tale, maybe apocryphal, maybe not, tells of a ronin whose scrolls were so elegantly composed that rival samurai refused to face him, fearing the mind behind such strokes must surely strike like lightning. Fringe anecdote. The famed Miyamoto Musashi once called calligraphy a way to cut without killing. His treatises on martial arts included entire sections on brushwork and painting, claiming that the path to mastery in one form led to clarity in all others. Historians still debate whether Musashi's softer arts were self-taught later in life, or part of his training all along. Either way, his legacy isn't just carved into stone, it's brushed onto paper. That duality made him a legend, not because he fought, Because he wrote, and here you are, living that very philosophy. A walking contradiction that makes perfect sense, a warrior who bows to words before wounds. A duelist whose sharpest weapon may always be the one dipped in ink. The house grows quiet again. You hear someone sweeping the path outside. The swish of the broom, the rustle of bamboo leaves. Somewhere far off, a wooden wind chime clacks gently in the breeze. You take another piece of parchment, not to write poetry this time, but a name. His name. Your opponent's. You do it carefully, stroke by stroke, not out of obligation, but reverence. This is how warriors preserve one another, not through gravestones, but through characters. A man remembered through the way his name unfolds across a page. Some do this after the duel. You do it now. Then for balance, you write your own, side by side. 2 names inked and still. You imagine them displayed together some day long after your sword has rusted, long after your bones have settled into silence. Perhaps students will study your calligraphy and wonder how it came to be that 2 opponents met and parted with their scrolls instead of scars. Maybe they'll marvel. Maybe they'll scoff. Maybe they'll miss the point entirely, but the ink will still be there, waiting, telling the story in its own silent, permanent voice. And that is the legacy you've chosen. You place the new scroll beside the earlier ones and lean back slightly, hands folded in your lap. You feel no desire to polish your armor or sharpen your blade. Today, that part of you is complete. Instead, you reach again for the inkstone. You pour the water. You swirl the brush, because while the duel is over, the writing never is. Afternoon light filters through the rice paper windows, now softer and gold-tinged. The edges of the world blur slightly in that way they do when everything is in balance. You are back at your desk, brush in hand again, tracing strokes not because you must, but because this is how you reset, how you return to yourself. You're not writing battle reports, not composing a grand tale of how you spared a man, or how he spared you. No, that story lives in the silence between strokes, in the space where restraint bloomed instead of blood. This moment is for something quieter, your name. You write it slowly, carefully. Not just the kanji, but everything it carries, your teacher's wisdom, the hours spent in the dojo, the scars on your shoulder, the poems you've never shared. Your name is not just who you are, it's how you've behaved, and how you'll be remembered. In this world, legacy isn't loud, it's graceful. There's something comforting about that, knowing that even if your blade dulls, if your voice falters, if your footsteps vanish from the earth, your brushstrokes remain. On temple scrolls, on old woodblock prints, on the inside covers of battle manuals and personal diaries passed from hand to hand. Your calligraphy isn't famous, yet, but it exists. And someday someone might lift a scroll in a dusty archive and pause. They'll run their fingers gently over the old rice paper, feeling the slight texture where the ink raised the grain. Maybe they won't understand the poem. Maybe they won't recognize your name. But they'll feel the care, the intention. That's how you measure legacy. You think now of the other warriors whose names have lived longer than their bones, the ones remembered not for how many they killed, but how they wrote. Like the poet samurai Taira no Tadanori, who died in battle, but left behind a single tanka poem that found its way into imperial anthologies. His death was sudden, but his brushwork immortal. Historians still debate whether the inclusion of his poem was due to political favoritism or genuine admiration. But the scroll is real, The kanji is his, and it's still read aloud today, in formal calligraphy circles sometimes before meals, sometimes before duels. You pause to sip from a small porcelain cup of tea, grown cool, but still fragrant. The jasmine lingers on your tongue. A thought drifts in, not a dramatic one, just simple. You might never have to duel again, not because you're afraid, not because you're fading, but because your name, your reputation has become your armor. Others will hear of what happened today. That two warriors met in the ring and exchanged scrolls instead of cuts. That both lived. That both wrote. And the whispers will spread. Not all reputations are built on victories. Some are built on discipline, on elegance, on stillness that others can't replicate. You recall a phrase your master once uttered while demonstrating a particularly complex stroke. Let your name arrive before you do. You didn't understand it then, thought it meant fame, but now you see it meant conduct, poise, the impression you leave not with your footfall, but with your intention, and how better to send your name ahead of you than with a scroll-fringed tidbit. In some courts, messengers carried calligraphy samples from envoys as a prelude to their arrival. It was considered rude to appear without first offering your hand, in brush form proof that your mind was refined enough to hold conversation. In a way, your brush was your passport. You glanced down at the scrolls on your desk, the one you wrote this morning, the one you composed after the non-duel, the name scrolls, the exchanged poem. Together they say more about today than any eyewitness ever could. You seal them with red wax and the wooden stamp your father gave you before his final campaign. His own brushwork, though less refined, was earnest. He believed that every samurai should leave behind at least one scroll of final record, not for glory, but to prevent being misunderstood by time. You never forgot that. And now, you're beginning to understand just how much it matters. Even this house, quiet and modest, feels like part of the script. A place where each object has meaning. The tea bowl, the inkstone, the armor stand. They all speak a language that doesn't need translation. It's the language of arrangement, of discipline, of peace prepared through precision. You let the wax cool and stack the scrolls carefully in their case, not for hiding, for safekeeping. Then, you take out a fresh sheet. Your hand doesn't hesitate. You write your name again, but this time not as a signature, as a gift. This one will be delivered to your opponent, a mirror to the one he gave you, and as the brush glides, you feel it. You're not writing for survival anymore. You're writing for legacy. You let the final stroke settle into the rice paper with the weight of closure. Your name once again rendered in black ink. The characters stand tall, but soft measured. A signature, yes, but also a reflection. You roll the scroll gently as if handling a fragile artifact, which, in a way, it already is. This one will go to him, not as tribute, not as surrender, but as acknowledgement. And then, without needing to speak it aloud, you feel the shift the duel has ended, but its echo will carry on not in stories, not in battlefield scars, but in this small scroll, sealed with wax and grace. You will send it quietly. A courier, a bow, a nod. It won't need explanation. He'll know. Because warriors like you communicate in brushstrokes. You walk the scroll to your outer gate, where a young attendant kneels, waiting silently, eyes lowered. You hand him the case and whisper a direction. He bows deeply before tucking it into his satchel. Within moments, he disappears down the path, swift and sure-footed. And now you are alone again. Or almost, because the brush is never far. You return inside and feel something stir, not an urge exactly, but a call. You sit once more before your writing board, lay out a fresh sheet, and begin writing again, but not poetry, not your name. This time it's a letter, to a younger samurai, a student in training, one you know well. Maybe he reminds you of yourself, hot-blooded impatient, more eager to swing a blade than to wait for ink to dry. This letter is for him. You begin simply. There will come a day when your blade feels dull, but your hand will remain steady. That day, pick up the brush. It's not a lecture. It's a map. You fill the page with what you've learned not just today, but over years of choosing to balance silence with strength, of letting art anchor you, of discovering that true authority comes not from striking first, but from deciding whether to strike at all. Write. Before you fight, you add. And you may not need to fight at all. You remember the scrolls of your own teachers, some stern others lyrical, all carried with you like silent companions, their words still unfolding in your muscle memory, in the way you tie your armor, the way you bow before lifting a cup of tea. Mainstream historians sometimes gloss over this, the written words of warriors. The academic record tends to chase battles and borders, but often skips the quiet moments between, the letters, the training journals, the casual ink notes on scraps of cloth, tucked into breastplates before war. But those are the real battlefield artifacts, because not all swords leave scars. Some write stories. A little-known example. There exists in a remote temple a scroll, known simply as the Letter of Fog. Its author, a mid-ranking samurai, died young in a skirmish, whose name no one remembers. But his letter survived. A reflection on hesitation, fear, and the act of writing one's own eulogy. It's short, melancholy, but breathtakingly sincere. Its most quoted line, "If I vanish today, let my brush mark the place." You think of that line now, and how many like it must lie hidden in cedar boxes and shrine walls across the land. Lost names, preserved thoughts, gentle ghosts whispering between the lines. Your own letter finishes itself before you realize. You seal it and set it aside, not sure yet who'll read it, only certain that someone will. That's enough. You push the brush aside and rest your hand on the inkstone. It's dry now, a shallow pool of gray, where hours earlier it was deep and black. You'll clean it later. For now, you simply sit. You realize that your brush, once a tool of practice, has become something more, a compass. And your words, they've become the blade you trust most. It's odd, isn't it? You were trained to conquer on horseback, with bow with blade. Yet here you are, more yourself in silence than in charge, more alive with paper than with war cries. The samurai code is strict, but flexible enough to hold paradoxes. That's the genius of it, and your paradox is this: you are strongest when your sword stays sheathed, and your brush uncapped, in that you are not alone. There's a reason so many warlords kept poets on staff, not just for flattery, but for sanity, for legacy, for peace. Because when the battle ends and the shouting fades, it's the ink that remains. Always the ink. You wake early the next day, though not because you must. There's no duel scheduled, no ceremony awaiting you, no command to deploy. Yet your body rises naturally, slipping into motion like ink flowing downhill, quiet, unrushed, purposeful. The house is still dark, but you move easily in the familiar quiet. You light a lantern, not for necessity, but for comfort. The circle of gold light warms the tatami mat and flickers across the scrolls stacked nearby. One of them still holds yesterday's poem. You run your fingers along the edge, not opening it, just acknowledging its presence, like a trusted companion sitting silently beside you, and once again, you reach for the brush. It's not routine, not compulsion. It's return. The daily return to clarity, like sharpening your sword, even when you're not expecting a fight. Because the brush doesn't just document life, it disciplines it. You grind the ink slow and deliberate. Each circle of the stick against the stone hums with memory. It's a meditation. The rhythm resets your heart. Left, right, press, lift. Like the forms of swordplay, like breathing, like waves smoothing the shore. Then, when the ink is just right, neither too thick nor too thin, you begin to write. This time, you copy a passage from an old treatise by Miyamoto Musashi. You must understand that there is more than one path to the top of the mountain. It hits you differently this morning. Not just as strategy, but as truth. You always believed the sword would lead you there, that the path of mastery was paved with discipline scars and steel. But now, after yesterday, you know the brush carved its own trail upward, winding quiet, no less steep. Musashi himself, the most legendary duelist of all, didn't just fight his way into history. He wrote himself there. His Dokodo, the path of aloneness, is still recited by scholars and warriors alike. He painted too. His ink works hang in temples, simple, bold, always balanced. Each stroke as commanding as any duel. Historians still discuss whether Musashi's turn to art was repentance or evolution. Did he grow weary of killing? Or did he realize that the final lesson of the blade is the brush no one knows? But the balance speaks for itself. You continue writing his words, not in imitation, but in conversation. One master to another across time. You've started doing this lately, interleaving the calligraphy of the past with your own reflections. Below each quote, you add your own kanji, sometimes a counterpoint, sometimes a deepening, sometimes just a single symbol to express how it felt to read it. A fringe practice, this kind of dialogue scroll, yet one gaining popularity in certain literary circles. Two voices across centuries. Calligraphy, not just as record, but as relationship. You wonder who might someday do the same with your words. Perhaps a student who finds your scroll long after your hand has stilled. Perhaps your former opponent reading your name again and writing one of his own in reply. Or maybe someone entirely unknown to you who simply recognizes the grace in your line work and chooses to respond. Legacy, after all, is rarely linear. You take a break and sip from a fresh bowl of tea, the bitterness grounding you. The window is cracked, letting in the scent of pine needles and wet earth. A bird lands on the sill, tilts its head at you, and then flutters off. You smile. The brush waits. You return to it. Now you draw not letters, but images. A pine tree, a flowing river, a single crow in flight. They're abstract, yet precise. Not meant to impress, just to exist. You remember that the samurai weren't only trained in sword and script, but in painting too. Especially the sumi-e-style ink-wash paintings, where restraint is everything. A single brushstroke can suggest a mountain, a cloud, or a lifetime. The discipline it takes to stop before overworking a painting. It's the same discipline required to leave your sword sheathed. You pause over this thought, letting it ripple through you. The sword and brush are not tools of war and peace, they're tools of timing, of truth. You could kill, you could create, but to do neither, that requires the most strength of all. You sign your small artwork in the corner as tradition demands, not with your full name, just a seal, a whisper of presence. And you realize, looking around your home, how many pieces of you exist in silent form. A poem tucked in a chest, a letter unfinished, a phrase scrawled on scrap parchment and pinned above the window. These are your shadows, your echoes, your invisible blade. The outside world knows your face. A few know your reputation. But the brush, it knows your soul. And unlike the battlefield, the page never lies. Later that day, as dusk settles over the hills and the lanterns are lit across the courtyard, you step into the shrine behind your home. It's small, just a wooden altar tucked beneath an overhang of old cypress. Inside are things only you understand: a faded sash, a chipped tea bowl, an incense holder carved like a crane. And among them your oldest scrolls rolled and tied in crimson string. You kneel, not out of obligation, but out of rhythm. This shrine isn't about worship. It's about remembrance. It's where you keep the versions of yourself you used to be. The calligraphy scrolls from your first years in training, the ones filled with uneven lines, trembled strokes kanji that barely stood upright. You pull one out now, unrolling it slowly, carefully. There it is, the character for Kokoro Heart. Crooked, unbalanced, over-inked. Yet you smile, because you remember how proud you were to finish it, how your fingers shook with nerves, how your master said nothing, only nodded once, and handed you another blank sheet. Encouragement in silence. The loudest lesson of all. You light incense. The smoke curls upward soft and gray, like thought turned visible. For a while you simply sit, watching it unfurl, letting the scent pull you into memory. And there in the stillness you imagine the moment after death. No, not the violence, not the battlefield. The after, the quiet, the ceremony. A hand, someone's hand reaches into your sleeve, finds your scroll, and gently unfolds it. They read your poem, and they see you. It's a strange comfort, isn't it, to imagine that your handwriting will outlast your voice, that your brush strokes, those silent declarations of being, will float across time, long after your armor has cracked, and your name has grown dusty. There's a belief rare now, mostly kept alive by the few remaining monks at the calligraphy temples, that the gods of the afterlife read the souls of samurai through their kanji, that the character for honor, if written clean and balanced, might tip the celestial scale more than any number of good deeds. Historians scoff, of course. There's no ink in the afterlife, they say, but the myth persists. And you're not sure if it's true, but you write as if it is. You rise from your kneeling position and place the scroll back among the others. Then from your sash, you remove the poem your opponent gave you. You've carried it all day. Still folded, still crisp. You open it now inside the shrine, letting his words mingle with yours. The strokes are bold, but gentle. They breathe. His hand, so steady in the ring, was just as steady on the page. The final line reads, "We met with blades sheathed, but parted with something sharper. Ink between our hearts." You sit with that. Let it echo. You don't need to answer it. Not now. Maybe not ever. The scroll speaks for itself. A fringe tradition from the north comes to mind, one rarely practiced and almost forgotten. When two samurai exchange poems before a duel, and both survive, their scrolls are sometimes bound together and buried beneath a plum tree. It's said that in spring, when the blossoms bloom, the spirits of restraint rise with them. You make a note to plant a plum tree. Outside the shrine, night has arrived. The insects sing, and the wind has cooled. The world has folded into itself. You return indoors where a candle waits flickering beside a clean sheet of paper. The brush stands ready, and so you write again. This time a reflection. Not poetry, not names, just thoughts. The ink between worlds is not black, but soft. Where blades once threatened a single brushstroke can open a gate. Let those who follow know we did not always need to kill to be remembered. You finish the final stroke and exhale. Your hand is calm. Your spirit is full. The room bathed in candlelight feels as weightless as a page just written. You set the brush down, then lift the candle to seal the scroll with wax. A final touch. A quiet whisper. Then without fanfare, you store it among the others. Your afterlife, if there is one now, has another story to read. And that's enough. By the time spring arrives, the plum tree has taken root. You planted it exactly where you imagined, just beyond the shrine, where the soil is soft and the morning sun stretches long across the ground. It's still young, its branches thin and spindly, but already buds are forming. Little green nubs, small promises of bloom. You visit it every day, sometimes with tea, sometimes with scrolls, always with silence. And buried beneath it, wrapped in oil paper, and bound in cloth, lie 2 poems, yours and his. Inked in the heat of a moment that nearly became violence, they now rest in peace, paired forever beneath the tree that will someday blossom with their story. You don't tell many people, not because it's a secret, but because it's sacred. These days, fewer and fewer samurai write before they fight. There's a shift in the air toward spectacle, toward reputation measured in victories, not verses. The younger ones wield their swords like thunderbolts, loud, fast, bright, but without balance. You try to teach them. In your dojo, the brush and the blade still sit side by side. You keep your inkstone next to the wooden sparring dummies. The scrolls of your students are pinned beside their attendance records. Before each match, you require them to write. A single word. That's all. Clarity, patience, yield. Some scoff. Some comply out of politeness. But others, they come back late at night, quietly, with questions, with open palms. And when they ask you why the brush matters, you never give them answers. You hand them ink, and they discover it themselves. One student not long ago wrote emptiness 100 times before realizing he'd been holding his breath with every stroke. Another, who never spoke above a whisper, penned a poem so sharp it silenced the room for an hour. That's the magic of it, the way the brush gives voice to the parts of the warrior that the sword never touches. There's a power in that, a quiet strength. Fringe detail, though, maybe not for long. A small school of samurai in the north has begun reviving the tradition of binding scrolls after duels, whether blood is drawn or not. They call it ink reckoning, a way to preserve the emotional truth of battle, not just the outcome. You smile when you hear this. Maybe the tradition isn't fading. Maybe it's just evolving. One evening, while tending to the tree, you hear footsteps on the gravel path. Not urgent, familiar. You turn. It's him, your opponent from that day, the one who tied a poem to his scabbard and walked away whole. His armor is simpler now, his gait more grounded, but his eyes still hold the same clarity. He carries a box, long and narrow, made of dark wood. Without words, he sets it down and opens it. Inside a scroll, large, handmade, the kind you don't write on lightly. "I've written our duel," he says at last. As it happened, not as it didn't. You bow deeply and accept it with both hands. Later, when you read it under lantern light, you find your movements described not as attacks, but as intentions. Your brushwork mentioned before your sword. Your shared silence captured in a haiku that nearly stops your breath. You add your own lines in reply, not corrections, just reflections. Then you bind the scroll in cloth and tuck it beside the other. Spring deepens. The plum tree flowers. The petals fall like fragments of memory, soft, fragrant, bright against the soil. You begin teaching more students now, not just to write, but to duel without drawing, to weigh their breath before their blade, to bow to the brush before the battlefield. Not all listen, but some do, and in those who do, you see it the future, not of samurai as warriors, but as artists of the moment, shapers of silence, preservers of presence, because the age of armor may one day fade, but the age of ink that never ends. Summer arrives quietly. The rains sweep the mountains, soaking the roofs of temples and washing the moss bright across garden stones. The plum tree is taller now. Its branches sway with the confidence of survival. Some of its petals have already dropped for the season, carpeting the shrine's steps in pale pink silk. You sit beside it in the early light, a scroll balanced across your knees. You aren't writing this morning. Not yet. Just thinking, watching the steam curl from your tea, listening to the birds argue gently in the cedars. You're not a young man anymore. Your bones tell you this, as does the patience you carry, like a second skin. You think back to all the times you thought you needed to fight, and how many of them could have ended with a bow, a poem, or a cup of tea. But you had to walk the whole path to understand the value of not walking it. It's an odd truth you've become more feared the less you've drawn your blade. Because your name no longer suggests violence, it suggests discipline. And there's something more formidable in a warrior who doesn't have to prove himself anymore. They come to you now, young samurai messengers, even monks with scrolls, with letters, with offerings of their own calligraphy. Some are good. A few are extraordinary. And one last week was so poor you nearly laughed aloud, until you realized how earnestly it was written. So you taught him gently, corrected not his lines, but his posture, his breath, his intention, because that's what this was always about, not perfection, but presence. You've begun compiling your own scrolls now. Not for publication, no one publishes a life like yours, but for safekeeping, for the shrine, for the tree. You write by theme, breath, choice, restraint. You even begin a scroll titled Why We Write Before We Kill, though you stop halfway through. It doesn't need to be finished. Not yet. You leave blank space for the reader to fill in, because if there's anything the brush has taught you, it's that white space matters as much as ink, sometimes more. Fringe story. One of your students once carried a blank scroll into battle. Unwritten, unsigned. He said it was his vow either to come home and fill it with a victory poem, or to leave behind silence in his place. He survived. He never wrote on it. It hangs in your dojo now. A white scroll in a black frame, the most powerful thing you've ever seen. The rains pass, and cicadas begin to sing in the evenings. The air grows thicker, heavier, but your spirit does not. You find yourself writing less these days, but deeper. A single character might take all morning, and when it's finished, you don't rush to the next. You study it. You sit with it. You let it breathe. Today you write the character for enough. You finish it with a dot of faint flick of the wrist. It feels like a whisper. You roll it gently and seal it with your mark. not for anyone in particular, just so that it exists. And with that, you rise, brush cleaned and drying tea, cooling in its bowl, and step back into the soft rhythms of the day. You walk past the dojo where laughter and ki-eyes echo through the walls, students sparring, some strong, some clumsy. One pauses to bow as you pass sweat on her brow, pride in her stance. You nod, just once. No lecture, no correction, just permission, because she's walking the path now, too. Someday, maybe she'll plant a tree, and beneath it, someone will read her words. So now you can set your brush down for the night. Let your fingers uncurl, let your shoulders release their quiet tension. There's nothing left to prepare, nothing left to prove. The ink has dried, the scrolls have been sealed, and outside, the wind is moving softly through the leaves like breath exhaled through ancient wood. You're not standing in the dueling ring anymore. You're lying down beneath stars older than any sword. And in the hush that follows, you realize the ink has always been more permanent than the blade. Swords rust, armor cracks, legends fade, but brushstrokes, they linger. They live in the folds of scrolls and the minds of those who pause long enough to read. You've walked the whole path now from trembling apprentice to composed master. You've fought with steel, and you've fought with silence. And in the end, you learned to choose the latter, not because you were afraid, but because you had nothing left to fear. So rest now. Let the stories drift like ink in water. Let the calligraphy of your life curl gently into sleep. And if dreams come, let them come in brushstrokes, fluid, balanced, unfinished but whole. Good night, warrior.